You're listening to the Laughing Couple podcast with your hosts, Brittany and Ryan Ostafy. Join them weekly as they discuss topics such as relationships, kids, sex, parenting, all unfiltered and all with a healthy dose of laughter. Please welcome your hosts, Brittany and Ryan Ostafy.
Allison, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
We are so stoked for this podcast because when we first got the request for this, we were like, oh my goodness, we haven't had this conversation on the podcast about mental health and specifically in relationships. And it's rare because we talk about a lot of stuff and this is one thing we haven't covered. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, we'll get into it a little bit later. I felt a little, what's the word?
What? Overwhelmed?
No. What's the word I just said? I said I don't want to be ignorant with this.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to unpack.
What was the word? But you said, because ignorance sounds like it's intentional to a certain degree.
No, innocently
ignorant about this subject matter. And so I'm stoked.
Okay, so before we start, we do a segment called I Love You or Annoying. So what is something that your partner does currently that is just driving you absolutely bonkers?
I'm working on not letting it drive me bonkers. But I'm someone who's very verbal. So when he says anything to me, I give him some sort of response. And I will often say many, many things and not get any response.
Really? You just stares at you?
Or I guess he doesn't think that, in his defense, I ramble a lot. I'm chatting a lot. I'm saying stuff throughout the day. And I'd say 80% of it he replies to, but there is that 20% where I get no response. And if it's important, I will say it again. And if it's not important, then I will continue about my day.
Is this via text or in person?
In person.
Oh, I'm well, maybe he's just skipping your text.
He never ignores a text. So.
Well, maybe just text him when you're right beside him.
Texts are important.
He can just be right beside you and be like,
I'm still talking. What's your partner's name?
John.
Hello, John.
Still here.
Allison here.
Wondering.
Mid-sentence over here.
Okay.
Anytime you want to join back in, I'm still here.
We just talked about kind of something similar. I always get frustrated with Ryan because I said this the other day and it's not my... I swear I heard it somewhere, but if I ask him something once is a request, a second time is a reminder, and the third time, I'm nagging, and I don't want to be nagging him. But I feel like it gets to this level where I'm I feel like I'm a dog whistle. And then it's just silent, he knows it's there, but it's kind of silent and it's not really there. And he's just no, it just kind of goes over my head, but it's really annoying. It's annoying and it's selective. I think that's what bugs me the most because it feels like selective listening.
Yeah, I'm learning that sometimes I do because we just moved in together. And so, there's more chores to do and more stuff to do. And so I think my fear always comes from I don't want to be nagging. But we've had conversations where I'm so if I ask something and you don't do it, is it okay if I just ask you again? And he's yeah. So as long as I can just say it however many times I need to say it for the thing to get done and neither of us get annoyed with each other about that. And that's just maybe our communication style. Then that feels more comfortable than when I feel oh no, what if he's going to get mad at me for asking the third time?
Right.
See, we talk about this thing called a condition of satisfaction, which is essentially you make a statement like that and the other person agrees. And as long as there's an agreement in between it, you can do whatever you want because that's the agreement that the two of you have, which is so powerful because I wish that was a tool that we had when we first moved in together. Because the truth is, 6 months in, we were almost on the other side of the table because of our communication. We loved each other unconditionally, had a tremendous amount of respect for each other, but did not know how to communicate effectively. So
you guys
thank God he's got you and you're an expert at it. Because I'll tell you that little teeny voice inside your head that says, am I nagging, that stops you from asking the question that would have resulted in the whatever it is that you wanted, the outcome that you wanted. You're frustrated. He's frustrated because he doesn't know you're frustrated. It's a game changer. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, and I think it's really unrealistic for us to think that like two random people with totally different backgrounds and communication styles are like seamlessly gonna walk through a relationship together.
For sure.
We didn't.
Yeah, we
Right. Like,
everything's
you have
fine.
to have those conversations.
So before we get into the book, and before we get into all the juicy stuff, I'd like to have an opportunity to discuss with you how this all came about, because mental health has been something that you've been knowingly dealing with since the age of 4, correct?
Yeah.
So let's dive into kind of the thing that made you who you are, that made you reach out to the world to say, let me help.
Yeah, so like you said, I got diagnosed with OCD when I was 4 years old. So I have no memory of a life without mental health being a big component of it. And, you know, like most things, it comes in waves. I've had better times, I've had worse times. But for me, my biggest trigger was always romantic relationships, where like nothing could knock me off course. Nothing could, you know, be more unsettling and bring out my symptoms more than like romantic rejection, heartbreak, the confusion around what are we, feeling the need to like lock something down to feel safe, which would then bring out a lot of, you know, behaviors that I'm not proud of. And so I dated in a really unhealthy way until about my late 20s. And then I sort of noticed that suddenly I was able to engage in this really important part of my life in a healthier way. And it was this really interesting thing of like, oh, like putting in this work of building up my self-esteem, getting a better sense of what does trigger me, why it triggers me, better understanding of my anxiety, my OCD, better vocabulary to be able to talk about it with people. Also some self-compassion around it that was really important. And so I was realizing, oh, this is really interesting that this journey is possible. And, you know, I kind of came up on the internet. I'm a writer, a screenwriter, I'm a comedian, I'm a podcaster. I, you know, was always like content creating, but I'd always, because I often share a lot about my life, mental health had always been a part of that content. And so I realized I wanted to write a book about this experience of, you know, figuring out how to date in a healthier way when you do have OCD, anxiety, and or depression. And at first I was like, okay, this is sort of going to be a memoir where I sort of just like tell my story. But then I was like, but how helpful is that? You know, because like it is, I think sharing your story is so powerful, and it's something, that guides my life and that I encourage from other people. But also, you know, it is individual. I am in a very privileged position of being, you know, a white cis straight woman who's always had access to mental health resources. And so I really wanted to blow out the world. And so when I started writing the book, I included a lot of expert interviews from mental health professionals, dating coaches, couples, you know, really expanding it beyond outside my own experience. And so the final product is actually a blend of memoir and a lot of self-help as well.
Can we also just give amazing praise for the title, Overthinking About You? I love that so much. I'm such an overthinker. I will fill in the blanks when I don't have any communication. My brain is like, well, this is actually what's happening. And it is so detrimental because you create these stories and these things that don't actually happen. So I was like, this is the perfect title for a book about mental health and relationships. So my next kind of like question for you is, so the book is about a lot of like personal experience mixed with education as well. Did you feel like there was a time in your life where like you were maybe like dating and you noticed, you're like, whoa, like I have a pattern with myself in how I'm showing up, and like was something triggering to you that you recognized that and said like, I need to step back, like this is something that I need to work on before I like get into a relationship? Like how did you notice that it was like a cycle that you were like, okay, like I need to talk about this more?
Oh, I mean, I knew that I was terrible at dating and that I was, you know, like it was, it's interesting. Like I would have willpower in pretty much every other aspect of my life, and I would not when it came to relationships. Like I could not stop myself from sending that extra text or from checking my boyfriend's Instagram activity to see if he was alive or if he was doing things he had lied to me about, or, you know, I was so I it wasn't like I was like, oh, this is going well. Like I knew that.
You're like, it's not.
Yeah, I knew that it wasn't, but I didn't really know what to do about it. And I also don't think that at the time I was able to appreciate how much my anxiety and my OCD were playing a part. And I felt very much like I'm the problem. And so that, there's a lot of talk in the mental health field where a lot of people think there's a lot of value in externalizing your disorders as like, and there's debate about this. It works for some people, it doesn't for others. But for me, it's always been really helpful to see my OCD and my anxiety as separate from me.
Right.
Versus like a who I am, and so I kind of wish that I had maybe understood that it was like not just like Allison the person, but Allison the person with anxiety and OCD who is behaving in these ways.
It didn't define you.
So I'm interested in asking this question because, and I don't mean this in an offensive way. I'm going to try to put some humor a little bit to it, but only because I don't have the words to kind of articulate what I'm trying to say here. But one of the things that we had a dating coach come on here a little over a year ago, and we talked about, bridging the gap between how quickly do you tell someone that you have a kid when you're single.
Right.
And that was a hard conversation for people to wrap their heads around, because it's like, I'm here and there's my kids, but my kids are me. And I'm not saying or suggesting that mental health is like a kid, but you talk about there's me and there's my mental health.
It's a big part of you.
It's a big part of you. And it's a difficult thing for people to just bring up. And I don't know why it is difficult for people to bring up. But when someone is dating or looking to date and they are dealing with mental health, how quickly do you suggest or invite them to bring up the conversation that like, hey, you're looking at dating me and here's what I'm dealing with?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is a whole chapter in the book, right? Because it is that big question. It is like, how do we tackle this? And I think the first thing is that you honor that it is a hard thing to bring up. It's like, maybe in a perfect world, it wouldn't be, but we live in a world where mental health is still stigmatized. I think people are much more open about saying they go to therapy, more open about, throwing around to have anxiety and have this. But like when it gets to the nitty gritty of like, how these symptoms manifest and impact your day-to-day life, suddenly that's a different conversation. That's like, oh, I can't get out of bed when I'm in a depressive episode is very different than, I've like felt depressed before. The reality of that is really different. And so I think, I had some great guidance in writing the book. And I think my big takeaway to answer that question is like, you really have to look at what stage of the relationship you're in versus how long you've known the person. So there are going to be people who it's kind of just surface level. Like you don't ever really dig into big things. You're more casually dating them. Like they don't even know if you have siblings because you've never even talked about it. Like, it's much more just like a casual flirty thing. And then I really don't know if you need to bring that up. But if you're starting to realize that this is a person that you want to build a deeper relationship with, and you are starting to talk about these bigger, more substantial times in your life, maybe they've shared that they've lost a parent or they've shared some other trauma in their life, then it sort of becomes that omission, right? Because then you're not really giving, they're maybe giving you the full picture of their life, but you're not really giving them yours. And I also, as scary as it is to have that conversation, it is so revealing, right? Like the way that they take that information is going to be very revealing about whether or not you're even compatible with this person. And I think, those of us who've, grown up or struggled with mental disorders, there may be this sense of like, okay, I just got to find somebody that accepts me. But really, you got to find somebody that's worth it, that like you want to accept it. And
amen.
Right? Like that when you share this vulnerable stuff, that they honor it, that they're not just like blowing past it. And I also think leaving space for them to have questions, like if I say to somebody, I have OCD, they might not know what that means. And also, honestly, how could they? Because OCD manifests differently in every single person. So like my version of it is very different than my friends' versions of it and other people's versions of it. And so I don't think that you need to share everything all at once, but I do, and I actually would advise against that.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that when you realize, oh, we're getting to a place where we're starting to really open up, and that honestly, depending on your age and just the type of person you are, that might be the first date. That might be the second date. Might be 3 weeks in. But like when you're realizing, oh, we're getting to a different level of knowing each other, that's really what I would advise.
It's almost like a respect thing too, right? Like I respect this person enough to let them know that this is a huge part of my life. And I'd almost think that it would be worse, quote unquote worst, if say you had an episode and you didn't have the conversation, and I'm sorry if the word episode is not the right, but like say you're going through something and they weren't aware that this is something that you're dealing with, I feel like how they're meeting you there would be different if you had like a conversation about it prior to anything happening, right? Like if it's like this is something that I struggle with. Now specifically, I think I watched some of your stuff. You said that you struggle with contamination OCD. Is this right? Or am I pulling it on my ass? Okay, good.
No, yeah.
Can you and I loved it because you were doing this like spoof on like talking to someone like, well, what's this? And you're like, I struggle with this. And they're like, I don't get it. And you're like, I know. That's because it's a mental illness. Like you're not supposed to get it. I loved that because I feel like as a society get like frustrated and angry when we don't understand something. Like I feel like we just want to understand it. And then if we don't understand it, we're like, well,
we avoid what we don't understand.
Yeah. Or we almost discredit it if we don't understand it. So can you kind of take us through that and like how that shows up for you in a relationship?
Yeah. I mean, so I, with contamination OCD, there's sort of like two routes that it can go. One is a fear of getting sick. Which makes, I think,
made COVID wonderful, eh?
Sorry?
That would have been wonderful during COVID.
Well, right. And then, so one is this fear of becoming sick. And then the other is literally just a fear of feeling yucky and feeling contaminated. And that's the kind that I have. So I'm actually not that afraid of being sick. I'm just terrified of feeling icky and like gross and like, and so right there, that's already confusing to tell people, right? So during this experience of COVID, I've actually been less worried than a lot of people in my life, but I'm still doing a lot of compulsions around cleanliness and cleaning because I'm afraid of feeling icky. So like I will go, to graduate. I'm in a grad program right now for psychology. And I'll go to class and I'll wipe down my chair and I'll wipe down my table. And everyone around me thinks I'm doing it because of COVID, but I'm just doing it because I think it's gross.
Yes. Yeah. Fair enough.
I find it interesting because Brittany and I talk a lot about morality, and a lot of people put heaviness around certain things. Morality is in right and wrong. I feel like when you have the thing is for me, this is I think what's really was wrapping my brain when we first got your package sent to us was I didn't understand why this was, and I don't mean this to diminish you at all. I don't understand why this is a big deal. Why couldn't someone talk about this? Every single one of us, whether we have a quote unquote mental illness or diagnoses, we all have that thing that people have to learn about us to make a relationship work. I have I don't even know what we call them, but I have that thing that Brittany hated about me when we first got together, and she had those things that she hated, the idiosyncrasies that we all have. That's the word I'm looking for. Now, they're not mental health, but they do impact a relationship. And part and parcel to being an effective relationship is that communication factor that says, I do this. This is my thing. It doesn't have to be a mental health thing. But I think when you have this mental health thing, and we do live in this society, and I do believe it's changing. I believe it's changing rapidly because of the work that you're doing and the other people in the community are doing about it. But there's nothing wrong about having a mental health. There's nothing wrong with it.
Today, but not everybody feels that way.
I know, but there's nothing wrong with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I think there's two sides. I think on the one hand, you're talking about when you're already in a relationship with somebody. But then there's the other part of just the experience of dating. And the experience of dating can be really rocky, even if you don't have a mental health disorder, right? Like you guys are happily married, but like, but think back to it. Somebody doesn't reply to you. You're really excited about somebody. They they ghost you. Like if you're in a mentally stable place, that can still bump for you. That can still kind of like put a damper on your afternoon.
Yeah.
But if you're somebody who struggles with anxiety or depression, that can be
debilitating.
A big bump, you know, like that can like, you can get, you know, I've been left by partners and it's made me suicidal. Like, you know, like the stakes are a little bit higher when you're dating with these disorders. So, and it can kind of almost feel dangerous to date because it can rock you so much that it's like, is this even worth it?
Right.
You're
nervous how you're going to react. Right. So you're like, why would I even put myself out there if I know that something like that could send me down a very dangerous path? So are there some, without obviously giving away like your entire book, but are there some things or advice that you could give to people? And I know that we can't blanket every single mental health disorder, but specifically for you and your experience, are there things that you have learned and that you can tell people, this is what I do when I find myself in those situations? Like, how did you work through that?
Yeah. So the goal of the book is sort of, it's not like 10 steps to find the perfect partner.
Sure.
It's more like, how can I feel more confident dating and that it will not rock me as much mentally?
Right.
And so, you know, something that happened to me while I was writing the book was, I got engaged, and which was my dream. And then 6 months later, he just like very abruptly walked out on me, and I have not seen him since. And so like that was by far my worst case scenario. Like I couldn't, like if you had said to me before that happened, hey Allison, what could be the worst thing that could happen? You would be like, oh, my fiance abruptly leaving because they don't love me anymore, and also providing no reasons as to why.
Right.
You know,
check.
And so then
check.
Yeah. And so then it was this interesting thing where I suddenly was like the first guinea pig of the lessons of the book, because I was having to use a lot of these tools that I'd been talking about to apply to my own heartbreak. And I'd say that one of the biggest things I did was, you know, he said something is missing. That's pretty much all I got. And an anxious mind can take something is missing and fill that up, right? Fill that up with every insecurity I have about myself, every fear I have about myself, every worry. I could say, well, it's because I'm unattractive. Well, it's my OCD. Well, I don't know how to cook, you know, and there were moments of that where I was trying to fill in what is that something.
Right.
But then having to take a step back and say, I will never know his reasons, and I don't need to know his reasons. Like that is such a different approach than what my anxiety wanted me to do, because your anxiety craves certainty and answers, even if those answers are you just shitting on yourself over and over again.
Right.
But instead to say, I can handle that I won't get an answer to this, and the act of looking for an answer is actively hurting me.
That's so powerful, because I think like even beyond it, like you said this before, even without a mental illness and without struggling with that would rock a person that didn't have anything going on top of that. Like, I think that I would continue to question, and that's super powerful. Like, not to seek answers is not going to serve you. Yeah,
we take, both Brittany and I have taken a couple of courses, but one of the baseline from the first course that we took was that we innately as humans are meaning-making machines. We make meanings of things all the time. And we're also at the core of our universe. Everything literally revolves around us. All you have to do for evidence is look around you. Everything's revolving around you. And so if the world revolves around you and there's a gap there, you're the only human being that's responsible enough to fill it, and you're going to make it mean something about you. And it's so powerful. I never heard it worded that way, to realize it just doesn't serve you. You don't need to have those answers, and you're never going to have those answers.
One of the things that my therapist at the time, who I worked with for years, that she did that was really helpful, because so many people said to me, oh, you know, maybe this was an important lesson for you. Maybe this was something you needed to have happen. And I was like, not really. Like,
fuck you.
I had done a lot of work on myself by the time I started that relationship, and I had worked through a lot of these issues. And so I didn't need this lesson of being left. But then she sort of reframed it and said, you know, maybe he needed it. And so to sort of look at it as like, oh, and this you know, we always want to be the main character of our stories. But I was like, maybe in this story, I'm a side character. And now that he's gone from my life, I can reclaim being the main character.
Wow, that's really cool. I also want to talk about, because I think this is so intriguing. On your Instagram, I noticed that you do a show and it's like horror stories about dating, but like when you are the horror story, and like you have people on and they talk about when like they were the ones causing this. Can you tell us about that, and maybe just like some of your most memorable like stories from that? Because I feel like that's such a fun, traumatic, but like very engaging like thing to talk about, because we've all been there. We've all been like the, what's the right word, the villain in a relationship, right?
Yeah,
I was the villain in I was the villain in Britney's for like 3 years. Yeah. True story.
How did you guys resolve that?
I am Gaston.
Well, Ryan and I, we've been neighbors.
Did a lot of work
since like I was 5, so we have like a lot of like we've dated like other people.
Yeah, that stuff too.
A lot of baggage. Yeah, we have to pay extra because we have to bring all of our baggage on. We did a lot of communication stuff, and then Ryan realized that he was wrong about everything, and now we're perfectly married. I'm just kidding. No, ours is a longer story, but yeah, tell me about this show, because I love the idea of it.
Yeah, so actually it just launched last week, so I've only had one show of it so far. But one of my good friends, Kelsey Dara, came on, and she was so funny. She was talking about when she was in high school, she and her friends would like track and stalk the boys they were dating to see if they were going to cheat on them or if they were lying on them. So they would be like, oh, we're at this party. And then they would like drive in their car and like go hang out outside the party and like try to see what was going on.
Oh my God, I feel like we've all done some questionable shit.
I have never done anything like that. I've never done anything like that.
But boys probably do. Like, I think men do like different things.
I probably showed up at the party.
Yeah. Maybe you were the boyfriend doing things that you maybe.
I find it funny because you talk about being a main character or being a side character, and I've never actually even heard it worded like that before. That's cool too, but you go about life. You go about life like everything's heavy and everything means something, and that like you don't screw up and you don't make mistakes, and the world around you is just like, as you said, maybe it's a learning experience for him, but we do make mistakes. And what Brittany and I have come to realize is that some of the biggest mistakes 5 minutes later can be funny if you allow them to be. And we found, as the laughing couple, that like even our lives, we're married, we've got kids, we've got all of the things. It still sucks sometimes, but if you can find the humor in it, and I love that, because if you go onto your platform is very educational, but predominantly humor. And you put a nice little spin on this. And I think that's what people need to realize, is that, yes, these things are real. Yes, these things are important. Yes, these things can be heavy at times, but they can also be lighthearted if you allow them to be.
Like a sense of relatability is huge in these big issues, which I think you provide, especially in mental health, which is awesome to see.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people think that working through this stuff is like, you have to treat it with, gloves on, and you can't, and I do think there is a time and the place for that. But for me, humor has been my coping mechanism my entire life. Mm-hmm. Like, one of the ways that I feel more comfortable sharing stuff with my partner is by making kind of a joke about it. Yeah. By like, poking fun at myself, by knowing like, oh God, the other day, it was a couple of months ago at this point, something happened and I felt like I needed to change my clothes because I felt like I was suddenly contaminated, or, I was having a bad OCD day. And instead of like doing that in shame or privately or, pretending it wasn't happening, I'm pretty sure I like ran into the bedroom screaming, the OCD is winning. And then I changed, Yeah. And so I think because that also allows him to be able to talk about it with a little more levity, and with it not like this thing we should only ever talk about, really.
Right.
With, and sometimes that's what it calls for, but sometimes it is just like, this is really ridiculous that my mind decided I'm suddenly dirty, and so I'm changing in the middle of the day for no reason. And we can laugh about that.
For sure.
So for people who are in a relationship, because I know a lot of the book is about the dating aspect of it, and I just know that there's a heavy listenership on our end that are already in a committed relationship. This is a subject matter that I would assert a lot of people don't openly talk about with their partners. And I'm guessing because they don't talk about it, these become issues. What kind of advice would you give to someone who's been in a relationship for a long time? I'm just starting to think in my head, like maybe there's some rules and some structure to support what it is that you're going through. But if you could give like one piece of advice to somebody who is experiencing this, who is in a committed relationship, to be, how do you just make it easier for both parties to A, understand it, and then B, deal with it when it's in the moment? Like if you're running into a room saying the OCD is winning, some might be, what? And some people I'm like, I get it. Let's change. Right. But you got to get to that level.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the books has some chapters that are maybe more about dating, but it's a lot about like, what do we do once you connected with somebody? How do you communicate effectively? How do you, and so I think which I've kind of touched on is like, it's really important for your partner to understand how your specific brain works, right? Because you might have two people with anxiety in a relationship, but one person, when they're feeling anxious, wants to go get everything done off of their checklist. And the other person wants to shut the door and have a private freak out, right? So then like these two people, when they see that their partner is anxious, the first one might go to the other one, well, why don't we go do all your chores right now and get them off the list? And the other person is like, that's making my anxiety much worse. Please stop.
Right.
So being able to have that conversation about what it looks like for you, your brain is a really confusing thing. And to expect your partner to understand how it works before you even understand how it works is an unfair ask. So I think to be in a relationship, you have to have a pretty good understanding of you, how you operate, why you operate in certain ways, be able to give some context for why this triggers me, why this is hard for me. And then when your partner has that context, they not only know how to better care for you, they also know what to not personalize, like what to not take in as like a rejection of them and your relationship, and instead recognize as just the symptom of a disorder or an issue that the person is just dealing with individually.
Right.
I think that applies for people who have and do not have mental health.
Yeah.
Like really, because I internalize, it's not even a joke. It's just a conversation that always comes up. We have different sex drives, and Brittany's sex drive and my sex drive aren't always in sync with each other. Well, it is when her sex drive is there, it's always in sync. Because I'm ready. But I had the hardest time for the longest time not making it a me thing. Right. And so I think even a great takeaway from this is whether you're struggling from a mental health issue or not, if there is struggle that you're internalizing here in the brain and you're living it out there's someone that's going to receive that message, and they may receive that message and they may be going through mental health issues or may not be going through mental health issues, but they're going to experience your communication and they're going to do what everyone does. They're going to internalize it. So I think even just creating that understanding of this is how my brain works. When I say this, it's a me thing, not a you thing. Not like we're breaking up and it's not you, it's me.
It just comes down to communication. I think everything that we talk about is communication. Like just in all across the board, you have to have good communication. And I really like one of the biggest takeaways I feel like I've got from this conversation is when you were talking about like divulging and being honest and open and transparent with this person who you feel like it's time, like I'm going to tell them like this is how I deal with things or whatever. It's more about their reaction, and if they're going to receive that and just like allow you to speak and they receive it quote unquote well, or they don't, like that's actually so telling. And why would you want to waste time with somebody who isn't going to receive it? In saying that, I don't know if it's necessarily great to just write them off, because some people might not understand how to take that in. So I really liked that, like maybe not being afraid to have these conversations, because it's going to be telling either one way or the other, like how you're going to show up for them and how they show up for you is in that conversation. I just really like that about anything. Like, don't be scared to do it, because you need to know how your partner is going to react if you're going to spend the rest of your life with them.
Well, ultimately, you're looking for a partnership.
Yeah.
Right? That's the outcome.
Yeah, and I think if you're someone that does struggle to date, whether or not it's for mental health reasons or other reasons, if you keep having bad experiences dating, it's going to keep making it that much harder.
Right.
And so I think one of the things I really want to, some people love to date, right? Some people, it's really fun for them to go out and have 5 dates a week with 5 different people. It's not an emotional burden on them. It's energizing. They love it. But if you're not that person where you find dating to be exhausting, you find it to be hard and triggering, the best thing that you can do for yourself is date in a productive way so that you're not wasting time on the wrong people, because that's going to burn you out so much faster. So having these things where it's like, I'm information gathering and like maybe even having those conversations a little earlier to be like, what is this person's thoughts on mental health? Like, are they someone who thinks therapy's a joke? If so, check, please.
Yeah,
for sure.
Like, no, I love that.
I'll have the soup.
Right. Like, get the dessert to go and go home, like.
Absolutely. I like
so
that.
Protecting yourself by being more productive in the way that you do it, I think can be really helpful.
Yeah, very intentional. Very intentional.
Allison, can you just let our listeners know where they can find you? So when your book is dropping, and then any of your socials.
You got a lot of them.
I know.
Yeah.
I really like your emotional support lady one too. I was following all those stick figures. I like them.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So Overthinking About You will be available everywhere on May 3rd. And if you pre-order, then you're eligible for some exclusive merchandise, which is always exciting. And then I'm at Allison Raskin. And then I also have the mental health account at Emotional Support Lady. And then you can also listen to my podcast with Gabby Dunn, Just Between Us, anywhere podcasts are available.
Perfect.
Now, where do they get the book? How do they pre-order the book?
So,
because we'll make sure we launch this before the 3rd of May for sure.
I can give you like a link that's like the form for getting the exclusive merch, and it also has like some different places you can buy from. But then if you buy from the Strand in New York, it'll be a signed copy, which is kind of fun.
Awesome.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much. This was such an enlightening conversation. I liked it.
Oh, thank you. I had a great time.
Perfect.
Talk about this stuff all day.
Yes. Have a wonderful day.
Allison, take care. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Aside from my soul.